The median age in Nigeria is under 20 years old, which is implying Nigeria has a large youth population. At the same time, the leading presidential candidate in the country are half a century older than the median.
Interestingly, at the time of the 1983 coup, then President Buhari was just over 40 years old. Where are the 40-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, and the 20-year-olds in this election, that is, the youth? Today we discuss youth participation in Nigeria's political process and the 2019 elections.
We are joined by Mr. Samson Itodo, who is Executive Director of YIAGA Africa. We will discuss with Samson the role of youth in the forthcoming elections in the country.
Leaders' Voices is a broadcast that shares the experiences of African thought leaders across the continent. My name is Peter Pinar.
And my name is Adebiyi Jelili Adegboyega. We are your hosts on today's live broadcast.
So today we talk about youth inclusion in the elections.
I mean, it's going to be an interesting conversation with Mr. Samson Itodo. More so that the entire world is looking at Nigeria, whether they'll be able to reciprocate what happened in France, whereby they elected a very young man as the leader of the country. You know, the Nigerian youthful population bought into this, into this agenda, and they actually want to make history. You know, and they started this not too young to run movement.
That's right.
It back. So a lot of advocacy oriented towards youth taking over the leadership of the country has been ongoing. So it will be an interesting conversation with Mr. Samson Itodo.
Absolutely. We do see some positive trends. We see in the last election that very few youth were running for office. And we're seeing a slight bump in those numbers as well this time around. So it will be interesting to see the actual extent of that youth inclusion. Not only candidates running for office, but also how the political parties themselves are engaging the youth in a variety of different ways.
And at the same time, to be interesting to see how all of these different youth organizations, civil society organizations that are focused on youth inclusiveness, youth participation in the political processes, how they are working together as a group to making sure that they achieve the objective of making sure that youth participation in political process in Nigeria improves tremendously.
Yeah, and we'll raise that issue of the collaboration among civil society organizations for sure. And one of the things on my radar is not only youth inclusion, but also young women and women more broadly inclusion in the political process.
I mean, that would be an interesting conversation with Samson Itodo, because it would be good to hear from his own generation if they are breaking apart from the patriarchal culture that actually might delimit women involvement in the political process in Nigeria. So it will be interesting to know what exactly they are doing to do in that regard. Are they taking women's involvement in the political process as a privilege or as something that needs to be done for the society to grow?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a number of different legal frameworks, both in terms of youth, but also women's inclusion that are working themselves through the legislative process. So it'll be interesting to hear his thoughts on what he expects the prospects for some of that legislation and national frameworks to be after election time as well.
Yeah, you're right.
Absolutely.
Right. Again, our guest for today's program is Mr. Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa. YIAGA Africa prides itself as a civic hub of change makers in the country. They are dedicated to promoting good governance and accountability, as well as the involvement of youth in the democratic spaces in Nigeria.
Samson is joining us via call link from Abuja, Nigeria. Welcome to the Leaders of Africa project.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, hello, Samson. Welcome to our program again, and we are happy to have you. So, how was your trip from the US back to the country?
It was good. It was very cold, but I think it was a moment of reflection at the Columbia University where we're talking about building a new framework for strengthening solidarity in social movement and civil society, and a conversation led by the renowned academic and scholar Chris Stone. So it was great.
Oh, that's good.
Wonderful. That's great to hear.
Yeah, so the first question we are going to be asking you on today's segment of our program is that we've been hearing a lot of things in the international community about how youths are engaging in the political process in Nigeria. What exactly is the level of the recruitment of youth candidates in the forthcoming election for political offices?
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for actually having this conversation. This is very, very important for Nigeria and this election for diverse reasons. First, this is the first election where the young people you call the born frees, those who didn't experience any form of military dictatorship, who were born in 1999, this is the first time that they're actually going to be voting in an election. And so it's very, very critical. This election is also organized within a context where increasingly young people are getting involved in the democratic process, whether through formal or informal forms of participation. You've mentioned the not too young to run. That's just one dimension of political participation and young people actually disrupting politics and asking difficult questions. You've got in the northeastern part of the country, the civilian JTF is actually dominated by young people. So even in the struggle and the fight against insurgency, you've got young people playing critical roles in not just the defense of democracy, but also spurring economic growth and development. So if you look at the private sector or the informal sector, which has been the driver of the economy, it's largely dominated by young people. Agriculture, if you look at hospitality, if you look at in the technology ecosystem, there's a lot of things that young people are doing. So young people are actually at the center stage. And when you talk about the recruitment of leaders and young people running for office, that is one aspect of participation that has been very, very low and very, very poor. Why? Because there are several factors. First, the legal regime is very hostile to young people. You've got a constitution that criminalizes political participation or limits the participation of young people. You also have the cost of politics, and weak political and undemocratic parties are also undermining the capacity of young people as well as the potential to ensure inclusion within our own political process. But despite this, you saw young people organizing effectively to change their constitution from the streets using their phones and by building a strong alliance with an older generation that cared about inclusive politics. And what Not Too Young to Run did was to address the legal regime. But then if you look at the political parties, after the bill was passed, the cost of nomination forms were so high that young people couldn't even purchase the forms. The Not Too Young to Run and YIAGA actually have a Ready to Run platform, which is the most comprehensive database of young people who are running for office. Before the party primaries, over 1,200 young people indicated interest they wanted to run for office. At the end of the day, only 300,000 were able to purchase the forms. And you could see that the political parties intentionally pegged high cost of nomination forms. And then if you look at the party primaries themselves, a lot of them were signposted by all forms of thuggery, money politics, violence. People were losing their lives. So you've got a toxic political system that does not appreciate the value of inclusive politics or the value of inclusion in our political process. And young people are not are not saying we can't do something about this. They are not just agonizing, they are organizing. And so if you look at the list of candidates published by INEC, the level of youth candidacy actually increased. In 2015, it was 21%. Today,
very low.
It's 30%. So there's actually an increase with youth candidacy in all the elections. A lot more young people are getting interested at the State House of Assemblies, thanks to the Not Too Young to Run and the Not Too Young to Run movement for actually leading the struggle. But we are not where we want to be. We're still very, very far. And because democracy is a process, we've got to be ready to actually follow this process all through. And I'm very, very optimistic that this generation of young people have the stamina, they have all the shock absorbers to actually go the long haul.
And I'm glad you raised that issue of nomination fees and such. It seems like the expensiveness is quite a barrier to running for office. Now, building on some of the comments that you made, how about women and young women in this kind of discussion? How are they? Have you seen the kind of improvements? You mentioned the improvements in terms of youth overall, but are we seeing that also in terms of young women and youth at that level getting into the political process?
No, it's embarrassing. The level of women participation and particularly young women participation is shameful, and I think it's unacceptable. Any country that is determined and committed to making progress really needs to think deep about the low level of women participation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unacceptable, especially for a country like Nigeria, where you've got a large number of female participation. It's very, very low, very, very poor. If you look at even the young women, a lot of them as well were also facing the problems that the young people were facing. For them, it's even double tragedy because first they are young, second they are women. And with a very patriarchal society like Nigeria, where we don't appreciate the value that women bring to policy making or to the governance process, we continue to exclude them. So women participation is very, very low. Are there women who are interested in participating? Yes, there are a lot of women who are interested in participating. But our system needs far-reaching reforms.
Mm-hmm.
First, there's an equal opportunities bill that is before the National Assembly. And the manner at which the legislators have treated that bill clearly shows that we're a society that is not ready to make progress.
Mm-hmm.
You also have just recently, the National Assembly has passed for second reading affirmative quotas for women. We are hoping that bill will pass. And I use this opportunity to call on both men and women to support this bill that is before the National Assembly, because we can't make progress if we don't have women on that decision-making table. We lose the opportunity to harness the value that they to the table. Again, the political system, the political parties also need far-reaching reforms. If they uphold internal democracy within their parties, if the candidate selection process is transparent, is democratic and accountable, you're going to have women actually emerge as candidates of political parties. Well, what we saw in this election period, women were asked not to even think about running for office because they are women. And that's just irresponsible, quite frankly, because we are all humans, and whatever creator that we hold or we revere recognizes the fact that all of us are born equal. So women should be treated equally, the same way men were actually treated. The other issue also ties around building strong cohesion. And first, on the policy front, there's a lot that needs to be done. INEC as an electoral commission has a gender policy, very fantastic document, evolving with a gender responsive culture within the electoral commission, and I think that that's commendable. But we need to go beyond that to having legislations that can alter this trend of the exclusion of women, because it's going to take something has to give way. And for that thing to give way, we need legislations. We need men like myself to begin to rethink how they conceptualize society. We also need to have leaders who respect women and create opportunities for women.
So a bit of follow-up on this involvement of women in the political process in Nigeria, because some of the things we've heard about Nigeria and some of the things I personally observed growing up in the country is that the political process is dominated largely by women. Because most of these market women politicians will rally around them for them to mobilize vote for them. And when you attend political meetings in Nigeria, it appears that women play very significant role in the processes of, building political parties, holding political parties together in election. So what now explains the fact that we don't have a lot of women standing elections in the country? Is it that their level of involvement is just limited to mobilizing for the political parties, and spaces are not being opened up for them? Or is it that ladies that are educated, women that are educated, there's a gap between them and those that are actually doing the grassroots work of mobilizing for political parties? What exactly is the problem constraining women participation at the level of standing on the ballot in political elections and in democratic elections in the country?
Dr. Jalili, I'm sure you know that first we've got a template of politics that is not only repressive, but is completely undemocratic. I'm sure you know that because of the nature of politics, the zero-sum nature of our politics and the do-or-die nature of our politics, that has discouraged progressives and women and young people and young persons with disability from engaging in politics. That's one. Secondly, what data tells us is there are more registered men than women. The recent data released by INEC, 52.8% are men, and then about 47.1 or so percent are women. So you can see from just the number of registered voters that men are actually more. And I don't want to go into what are those cultural, what are those religious barriers that impede the participation of women. I don't want to go into that. But my point is, there are women who have been participating in the process. What we need to do is, are there mechanisms that can be instituted, first to guarantee their right to participation? Because it's not a privilege. And when I hear conversation around women and gender representation, we come from a standpoint that we're doing women a privilege. No, we are actually doing society. We're doing society a privilege because they have a right to participate. So we need to reinforce that. So that's one. The second is we need to have legislations, that promote women participation. And thirdly, we need to make politics interesting for women and young people to participate. Not the kind of politics that we play today that is bereft of values and the values of integrity or even ideology. That is why men and politicians move from one party to another. But today, our own view of women is just exploiting them for political campaigns. But I tell you something, the women are becoming wiser now. If you look at the rate in the parliament has been very, very poor. We've moved from 11%, I think, in 2011 to about 5.6 or about 6% in 2015. And that shows that we're actually retrogressing. And so these factors need to be addressed. And I am confident that the women's movement require a lot of support. And men like he for she we need more men to engage in this process and supporting women. We need to start from our families and begin to tell our kids that your sister or any woman is as equal as you are and she's got equal rights. We need those pre-independence traditional practices and culture that does not place us at equal pedestal. We need them reversed and addressed, because I belong to a generation that doesn't believe in all those cultural practices that doesn't recognize women and say women cannot speak, women cannot hold positions, women are limited to the other room, women don't have a place in politics. I think anyone who is thinking that way should be told that the train has actually left the station a long time ago, because both men and women are equal partners in development.
I'm glad you mentioned all those pieces in that discussion. I think that's important, and it is important to point out that the voters' roll has more men than women, and I'm glad you pointed that out. Now, building on some of the discussion that you've already brought up in the issues that you brought up about legislation and legal frameworks, it sounds and it's very clear that YIAGA Africa has been a big player when it comes to advocacy around legal changes and adjusting the legal framework to enable the youth to have a voice, either running for office or just participating in the process more broadly. I'm wondering if you could reflect and explain and share with our viewers a little bit more beyond advocacy in terms of legislation. What are some of the ways that you've been able to engage youth, particularly in this electoral process?
Well, there are diverse ways, and YIAGA works in 4 different areas. Elections are a big part of our work, and our election work is stratified into 4. We've got our electoral institution support program, so we conduct electoral assistance to the Electoral Commission. We also can do voter and civic education. We are also involved in electoral reform and electoral research, and then our 4th program is our electoral integrity work, where we've got Watching the Vote. Watching the Vote is Nigeria's largest independent citizens-led movement on electoral integrity that leverages technology and statistical principles for observing elections. So we're employing the parallel vote tabulation for observing elections. And for these elections, we're deploying about 3,900 observers to a random sample of polling units across Nigeria, where we'll be gathering information using text messages on the process as well as the results. And based on our methodology, which is a PVT methodology, we're able to verify whether the results declared by INEC are accurate and a reflection of the votes at the polling station.
Wonderful.
So just even looking at our electoral integrity project, you've got a lot of young people who are involved in this project. And so you've got young people who are already participating, because participating as an observer and providing oversight on the process is also another form of political participation. And this is one sphere young people we're engaging young people on this project. The second is around our voter education initiative, where we've got lots of young people across Nigeria, because YIAGA as a movement is in all the 774 local governments of Nigeria. We've got young people who are volunteering for voter education. They are disseminating messages using social media, using town hall meetings, using flash mobs in different parts of the country, and are mobilizing people to go collect their permanent voters card as well as vote at elections. So this is one aspect that YIAGA is also deeply involved in. On our electoral research work, YIAGA is a data-driven organization, and over the last couple of months, we've been conducting studies and analysis of data, and we're sharing data with stakeholders. The recent that we released few days ago was on the youth candidacy for the 2019 elections. And we are the only organization that have critically looked at the data and are sharing the data. And we do so for 3 reasons. One, we want to counter fake news and misinformation, because to us, data is the new gold, and data can counter falsehood and provide evidence. So we're providing evidence to the public as our own contribution to countering fake news. So that's something. Next week, we're also releasing another report on a SWOT analysis that we performed on youth candidates. So we did a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of youth candidates across the country. We deployed enumerators, trained enumerators to gather data, and we're using this data, sharing it with stakeholders to make informed choices, both policy and programmatic, in the course of their engagement. And there are several other initiatives under Ready to Run that YIAGA is deeply involved with. We're also working with the National Parliament. We set up the Young Parliamentarians Forum in Nigeria, in Ghana, as well as Sierra Leone. And ahead of these elections, we're also watching to see the percentage of young people who will come to the National Assembly as well as the State House of Assembly after these elections. And we already have plans in place to conduct induction trainings for them as soon as they emerge, on understanding legislative practice and procedure, and also looking at How do we strengthen the institution of the National Assembly by working with specific committees to deliver on their mandate, but also expose these leaders to opportunities out of Nigeria to deepen their capacity, because the capacity and the level and the competence of a policymaker or a public leader to a large extent determines the output and her performance in office. So these are a couple of things that YIAGA is deeply involved with, and a lot of young people are the center point of what we do.
I'm really glad that you brought up the issue of election observation and highlighted the fact that you'll be observing. It sounds like you'll have a lot of different pieces to the observation, one a more qualitative bent, but also the parallel vote tabulation or a survey-based observation. And that's wonderful to hear that you're doing that. Now, I'm curious about, in terms of the election observation in Nigeria from a civil society point of view, so that is domestic observation, is there a lot of collaboration across different organizations on the area and in the area of domestic election observation? Because as some of our viewers know, in many countries, there's a lot of discontent and competition when it comes to election observation at the domestic level. So I'm wondering, how cohesive and cooperative is the environment for domestic observation in these elections?
Well, Peter, as a political scientist, competition is good for democracy. Because democracy is about competition, but healthy competition. And so competition isn't a bad thing in this field of work. But what is important is there's need for collaboration. And I am against negative competition. Competition has to be bounded by certain principles, the principles of mutual cooperation, mutual respect, mutual accountability, and that exists within the Nigerian civil society space. And different organizations are deploying observers. What is quite unique is the methodology is different. A lot of groups may be using technology, but they're probably using technology for observing a different component of elections. And if you look at the trends and how election observation has evolved, we now have team-specific forms of election observation. There are groups who are looking at security. There are groups who are looking at women. There are groups who are looking at youth. There are groups who are looking at the results. Some are looking at the processes. At the end of the day, what you've got this ecosystem of groups who are looking at different aspects of the elections, and that's the value of collaboration. And so it puts the civil society sector in a good position to assess the quality of the process. So groups in Nigeria are working together. We're sharing information. One of the aspects of collaboration and which YIAGA has also been at the forefront in advocating is if you look at how statements are shared, you will never have different observer groups addressing press conferences at the same time. They all go after each other. It's sequenced, so they're able to provide their own assessment of the elections. But more importantly, with respect to information sharing, there's a mechanism for sharing information. There's the election civil society situation room for different movements. YIAGA watching the vote, and so we share information. So some level of collaboration actually exists within civil society groups, but the methodology is different. YIAGA, for instance, is the only organization doing the PVT. You have other groups who are also using technology, but also focusing on either collating results. You have other groups who are doing different things. So, and it's good. The diversity is very, very good because Nigeria is such a large country. No one group can actually deploy and cover the entire country. You've got over 119,000 polling stations, and plus the voting points, we have close to 174,000 polling stations. Which group has the capacity to actually deploy observers to all of the polling stations? None. Even the political parties, how many of them can deploy party agents to each and every one of the
That's
174,000
right.
polling places? So this is very good. But collaboration does exist within civil society space with these
That's
elections.
that's wonderful to hear. So it's many groups that are observing in different ways, but also collaboration. And I like how you raised that issue of party agents, because we see in many countries that there are often these dark zones in the country where nobody's observing because the political parties or civil society doesn't have capacity. But with this collaborative framework, it sounds like civil society, broadly speaking, will have the ability to really observe all aspects of the process on E-Day and after throughout the country.
Yeah, our next question is also on collaboration. So we'd like to know how well is YIAGA collaborating with youth in various political parties, the APC, the PDP, and the party that prides themselves as largely youth-oriented. So how well is YIAGA collaborating with those youths?
I don't know which party prides itself as a youth-friendly party, because our ranking of youth-friendly political parties based on the list of candidates clearly shows that the APC and the PDP are very unfriendly to young people. The top 10, in fact, the top 15 parties that presented youth candidates, both the APC and the PDP, are nowhere in that particular rank. So I don't think they are youth friendly in any way. If you look at the cost of their nomination forms, it clearly suggests that the space is not even for young people. What they did was to pigeonhole and conscript young people to only buy forms for State House of Assemblies, and that's one they even made cheaper. But even at that, buying a State House of Assembly form for either 500 or 600,000 is quite expensive and very exploitative for a country where youth unemployment is about 36%, and then overall employment is somewhere about 23%. So that's for me. I don't think that should be the case in my view. But working with youth in political parties, you must recognize that we are a non-partisan entity, and we are only concerned and determined to ensure transformative politics and political inclusion and defend democracy. And so we work with all the political parties, and in our engagement, we ensure diversity. For instance, in the TV show called Ready to Run, which is aired a live TV show every Sunday, the show is for youth candidates from 91 political parties. So, and young people from all the 91 political parties. So that's my response to that. But as a non-partisan entity, we will continue to encourage more young people to join political parties, because that's where you start also leading change. A lot of young people don't want to join political parties, but you can lead change by sitting on the fence or being on the other side. Like someone will say, if you think politics is dirty, then get there and become the detergent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, in a polarized political environment, you raise the issue of being nonpartisan, right, and being impartial and engaging all stakeholders. In a polarized political environment, is that something that's really difficult for civil society to do, to navigate that polarization? And in addition to that, do you find at times that certain citizens view civil society or even YIAGA Africa as associated with one party or another, despite the fact that civil society is or should be perhaps nonpartisan?
Of course, you always get that, and anyone who tells you they don't get that is living in dreamland, because propaganda is a strategy that is employed by political actors. So you always get that. For a very multi-ethnic and pluralistic society like Nigeria, one of the greatest challenges is actually generating consensus. Can we ever have consensus on a particular issue? And democracy is a very, very expensive enterprise, very expensive. And achieving inclusion and ensuring all voices are heard comes with its own sacrifices. So it also comes with its own difficulty. So it's just managing it. And for me, beyond managing it is a commitment. It's a commitment to ensuring that all voices are heard, whether they are minority or they are majority. We just need to create a space for everyone. So it's difficult. I wouldn't say that even as a leader of the Not Too Young to Run movement, it was easy generating national consensus on this issue, because people and for very altruistic reasons, are more if their choices are made by either their geographical or religious extraction, and their background. And I think it's democratic, it's part of democracy to also respect their views, but not shut them down, because that's what democracy is about. So it's difficult generating consensus, but what we've also tried to do is to ensure negotiation and dialogue. There's no alternative to negotiation and dialogue. And that's why, for those of us who are advocates and organizers, we'll continue to advocate, we'll continue to organize, and just make people see reasons why we should do things differently, and also do them timely, because our country is in a state of flux, and it needs fixing. Have we been labeled before? Yeah, you would always get that. And the thing with the civil society sector is, of course, politicians think they are very smart. Politicians know when it suits them, you are their friend. When it doesn't suit them, oh, you are an enemy of the state. And so I think it's about the principles, upholding to those principles. And as civil society, we are advocates, we are vanguards, and we are defenders of democracy who are providing oversight. We must not take the responsibility of citizens and think that we speak for citizens at all times. And citizens must also not abdicate their responsibilities to us, because we are also human beings and we can fail. But at every point in time, I think that for those of us who are leaders in this sector and in this field, it's about the principles. And therefore, in everything that we do, how does it benefit the people at the end of the day? How does it strengthen our institution at the end of the day? Because the common good has to be the driving philosophy of activism and this work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very good one, especially the aspect of you landing it to the common good and that everybody can fail for one or two reasons. Something, let's go back a little bit to the aspect of misinformation. Could you please tell us in clearer terms what exactly you guys mean when you say misinformation? Are you talking about propaganda? Are you talking about fake news? And what specific effort is your organization making to address these meanings of misinformation, or what people consider like a fake news? Because that came up in our conversation with the executive director of Center for Democracy and Development. She also mentioned some of the things that they've been doing to attenuate or address the issue of misinformation regarding in the political process in Nigeria. So what specific effort are you making in addressing this issue? And what do you mean by misinformation or fake news?
Well, I'm sure there's no one who can define fake news and other alternative facts or misinformation than you know where you are. So
that we do.
but it's simply information that is just aimed at deceiving people, and it's just falsifying information or tampering with information with the ultimate goal just to deceive people and just propagate falsehood. And this can be done via different means, and this is what's threatening democracy across the world, and including Nigeria as well. You know how the last year's election went, the role that the Russians actually played. You can see how data and personal data is being compromised and is used, whether through you use compromising algorithms or using algorithms just to influence political behavior, and doing so for very negative purposes. So this for I don't think there's any better definition of misinformation or fake news than this, and it's threatening Nigeria's elections. It's even more complex when you're dealing with a fragile state. It's more complex when institutions of accountability are either non-existent or cannot perform their function. It's even worse when the state itself is even sponsoring fake news. And so it's become very, very difficult today to you don't even know who to trust. And that's actually the goal of the propagandist. That's what they want. They don't want people to actually trust information. They don't want people to trust when figures are released that these are the amounts that are actually stolen. Or they don't want us to trust when election results are declared by the Electoral Commission and someone has been declared winner. And they don't want us to trust those information. And so it's something that needs to be addressed. And for us as an organization, we're simply using data to counter fake news and misinformation. If you say that the number of registered voters is X this, it's this number, we will check the data. What does the official data say? And we will proactively share the data. And what we have been doing is, mining data, analyzing data, and putting it out there in a easy to read and user-friendly manner so people can get informed. And so when fake news or they get any form of propaganda that they are not sure of, they can always they can always compare and verify. The second we're also doing is calling on young people to delegitimize fake news. Fake news cannot be disseminated if someone is not there who retweets or likes or shares on WhatsApp. And so what we are encouraging young people to do, because we are the consumers, mainly the consumers of this junk and fake news, is to take an extra step to not only verify information, but don't share any information that you're not sure. I think that this short attention span that we have and the speed at which we want to be the first people to actually break the news is something that we need to address. And I know that the youth identity is associated with adventure and fun, but you can destroy society by just one piece of information. And just even exposing the dangers that this poses to our society. It's something that YIAGA has been doing. So in all our efforts and engaging, that's practically how we've been doing that. We don't have a established fake news center or verification center like other groups like CDD does have, but our own little way of saying, these things happen in everyday lives. This thing happen on our phones. This thing happen on our WhatsApp groups that we belong to. This thing happen on Facebook. And we're encouraging people who belong to groups to say, hey, we're restricting posts on this group. Do not post information that you cannot confirm, you can't verify. Once you post something and we see that it's from a questionable or a non-trust, a platform that is not trusted, we take it out from the group. And also ensuring that there are strict rules. For group membership on WhatsApp. So I know the service providers as well as the platform or software developers or programmers are doing everything possible to address this menace, but I think citizens at the end of the day have a critical role to play. And for young people, it's about delegitimizing fake news. Don't post results that you're not sure of. Wait for the official election results. So that's pretty much our own contribution to countering misinformation and fake news.
Wonderful. Now, as we close, I guess I had one last question for you, kind of a summary question in a sense. And And sometimes during our discussion here, I have this feeling of optimism, right? There's advocacy for different legal frameworks that will help include youth in terms of political parties, in terms of the broader political process, thinking about the issue of quotas that you mentioned. At the same time, I have this sense of pessimism to some extent when you discuss the fact that the two major parties, and we think about the two leading candidates of those parties, are much older than the median, as we said in the intro, but also the level of youth inclusion in terms of the candidates running is limited. You talked about the nomination fees, for example. So where should we be? Should we be optimistic? Should we be pessimistic? What does this look like, post-election for Nigeria?
And I say this to those who are actually out there. Just think about it if we didn't have civil society in Nigeria. Just think about it if we don't have active citizens who are asking questions. Maybe the president wouldn't have signed Not Too Young to Run. Maybe he wouldn't have signed the Disability Act. Maybe he wouldn't have prosecuted the former SGF who was accused of corruption. Maybe he wouldn't have reversed some of the policies. Just think about it. And so for all the efforts that citizens are actually putting in place, you may call them marginal gains, but in this journey of democracy, marginal gains are not really marginal. They are actually gains that help in renewing the faith of citizens in democracy. So for me, I am very, very optimistic. Again, the statecraft and nation building, it's not something that happens in a day. It takes a long, it's a process. So we will have to go through this process. What we need is to remain focused on our destination. And our destination is a place where every citizen of Nigeria is recognized as a citizen and his life or her life does matter. Is that place where security agencies will not be partisan in their management of election security. Is that place where both the executive and the judiciary and the legislature will work harmoniously whilst not relegating the principle of checks and balances and separation of powers in the course of their work, but also a society where unemployment will be reduced. We talk about Nigerian youth and African youth or Nigeria sitting on a ticking time bomb. Peter and Jalili, there's no time bomb anywhere. The bomb has exploded. It exploded in the northeastern part of the country. It exploded in the northwestern part. It exploded in the southeast. It exploded in the north central part. So there's no ticking time bomb anywhere. The bomb has exploded. And so because we know that this bomb has exploded, we just need to brace up and ensure that as people go to vote in this election, the only category of people who deserve their vote, especially young people, are those who have character, those who have competence, and those who have capacity. Anything short of these three, do not waste your time voting for anybody.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Mr. Samson Itodo, for joining us on the Leaders of African Project. All the best with contributing to the electoral process in Nigeria and for advocating for gender-aware and youthful inclusion in political and democratic spaces in Nigeria. It's our hope that you are going to join us again in the future, particularly when we want to do analysis of the post-presidential election in the country. Once again, thank you for joining us on the Leaders of African Project.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. And please, I hope you also come back to Africa someday.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Both of us. So, Mr. Samson Itodo, very impressive executive director of YIAGA Africa, and a really interesting and passionate conversation about the role of youth in political parties. So what do you think? It seems like the political parties are not engaging in the youth in the ways that they should be.
I mean, that was quite. It was quite interesting for me to hear that because when you listen to the rhetorics of the political party, you have this impression that they're actually engaging the youth in the process. But when I listen to his analysis, he was speaking with a sense of data that we have this data telling us that the level of youth participation in the political process in the country is actually reducing compared to what we had last in the last political dispense, the last in the election that aired in 2015, and he was able to make reference to some of the points, some of the factors that actually could be responsible for this. He spoke about the nomination fees.
Yes.
That it was just like pricing the youth out of political.
And that's not something that's just a Nigerian phenomenon. We should mention, right? The fees for running for different levels of office has been steadily increasing in many African countries. So it's definitely seems like a universal barrier that is being used. Yeah,
exactly. So I mean that was an interesting point, and then the fact that he alluded to some other issues that are actually being barriers to youth being involved in the political processes, and so what we should be looking forward to is what could be the situation of things in the future, in future elections in the country. Are political parties going to be sensitive to some of the issues he raised? And if political parties are not going to be sensitive to some of the issues he raised, then are we going to be pessimistic about youth involvement in the political process in Nigeria, or we are going to be optimistic as it sounded to be, because it seems to be optimistic.
Yeah.
And on my own side, I was like, oh, I'm a little bit pessimistic, because if youth are not able to stand on the ballots, then how do we increase their participation in the decision-making table in the country?
Yeah, and one thing I just want to emphasize, in something that you did mention, was this use of data. Right. In our two conversations now that we've had with prominent civil society leaders in Nigeria, Ms. Hassan last week, and now Mr. Samson Itodo, the issue of data and how civil society is beginning to gather data on the issue of misinformation, on the issue of the vote tally and the vote counts. Right. Data and statistical methods are now becoming a real big tool for civil society. In terms of pinning down what is going on and thinking about the kind of interventions that are necessary.
I mean, I'm beginning to see the emergence of a new form of leaders of civil societies in the country. I mean, back like 20 years ago, in the last 10 years, you hardly see civil society organizations that are data driven. And I think it's a kind of generational change that is taking place in the civil society landscape in the country. And I think this is a very important and remarkable development, because it's so difficult in the modern society for you to be able to do anything without actually having data, having a grip of research of what are the issues, using research to inform whatever you want to do. And I think possibly that explains why they are doing very remarkable things in the country. Like, okay, look at yesterday. We heard about fake news. They are also engaging fake news in their own ways. They have data telling them, oh, these are the sources of fake news, these are the trends, and these are the patterns. And imagine, he also spoke about the issue of who are these youth involved? What are the weaknesses? What are the strengths? It's not just about making noise. It's not just about this advocacy going to the street. It's also about looking at what are the major ways we can make effort to change the narrative of youth inclusiveness in the political process. And he was talking about the legislation, because they were able to find out from research that legislation needs to change for you to be fully involved in the process. And they've been also been doing some other things. Look at the issue of gender aware.
Yeah, that was a really interesting discussion.
Exactly.
Because we were talking about the youth on the one hand, but then when we think about women and young women, the story is even different and maybe even slightly more drastic of a concern, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I so much love the latitude of the commitment of YIAGA Africa regarding youth inclusion in the political process in Africa. It's not something very limited. I think they have a broader view of the issue, and it seems they have the capability to advance the issue much better than the civil society organizations we used to have in the country. And interestingly, well, this is the beginning of the journey for them. Are they going to maintain the same momentum? These are issues we want to explore with them maybe in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, by asking Samson Itodo, what has changed in terms of how you started and your focus now looking
Exactly,
forward to
and we've seen some marginal improvements when it comes to the number of candidates running, youth candidates, right?
exactly.
The last election, very, very low. I think he said 1%, right?
Yeah.
It's so low, but we've seen some progress in that area. So where does it go beyond that, right? And I really hold out hope for some of this national legislation that's being discussed. I think a lot of YIAGA Africa's legislative advocacy may really bear fruits, and I think maybe that's a great starting point for thinking about inclusion, right? It's not just about mobilizing youth and having youth forum, but having those legal frameworks in place may really have an influence, I think.
I mean, I think another interesting point he brought up was like creating a media platform for engaging the public, making them to be aware of youths that are standing in election in various political parties. I think this is really, really innovative because it's a way of saying that, oh, we belong to all youth in the country, regardless of whatever your political affiliation is. I mean, that level of neutrality that YIAGA Africa is maintaining, bringing to the table, it appears to me a way to tell people that we are advocating for all youths in the country.
That's right.
And I think that's very important if they really want to get you to be involved in the process.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, do you have thoughts on youth engagement in the Nigerian elections or after the elections? We want to hear from you. Share your comments and questions with us at yourvoice@leadersofafrica.org. And that's all for me, Peter Pinar.
And for myself, Adebi Jelili Adegboyega. We look forward to you joining us in the future. And this is it for today from the Leader Voice of African Project.
Thank you for joining us. Until next time.